recorded.
So I wanted to bring you some information about the science, some more science stuff. Okay. So we're going to talk about the Punnett square, and let's just hear what this guy has to say about it.
In this video, we're focusing on sex-linked inheritance. Now, this is different to autosomal inheritance, which we've spoken about in a previous video, in our Punnett square video, because we're talking about traits that are inherited on our sex chromosomes. So remember the fact that we inherit 23 pairs of chromosomes. So pairs because one comes from mum, one comes from dad. So remember, for example, chromosome 1, we have 2 of them. One came from mum, one came from dad. And
hold on a second. If you read this is the Punnett square. Okay, this is the Punnett square, and it is useful in insofar as educating you on how the sex chromosomes work and how they are transferred into babies. And this should be already general knowledge, right? But I'm going to use it as a jump off for what I'm actually going to talk about next, which is how the Turner syndrome females prove that males are not in fact human. Okay? How the Turner syndrome females prove that males are not human. Let's continue.
all the way through for 22 pairs. These are called our autosomal chromosomes. But our last pair of chromosomes are our sex-linked chromosomes. They determine whether we are genetic male or genetic female, right? So it can either be an XY, and if it is an XY, we are a genetic male. It can be XX. If it is XX, it means we are a genetic female. Now remember, there's 2. So that means one comes from mum, one comes from dad, for example, right? So just remember that point. So what we're focusing on today are traits that are inherited on these chromosomes. And the reason why we need to do it separately is because what we find is that the X chromosome is a lot bigger than the Y chromosome. And because of that fact, the X chromosome contains inheritance. Now this is different to autosomal inheritance, which we've spoken about in a previous video, in our Punnett square video, because we're talking about traits that are inherited on our sex chromosomes. So remember the fact that we inherit 23 pairs of chromosomes. So pairs because one comes from mum, one comes from dad. So remember, for example, chromosome 1, we have 2 of them. One came from mum, one came from dad, and all the way through for 22 pairs. These are called our autosomal chromosomes. But our last pair of chromosomes are our sex-linked chromosomes. They determine whether we are genetic male or genetic female, right? So it can either be an XY, and if it is an XY, we are a genetic male. It can be XX. If it is XX, it means we are a genetic female. Now remember, there's 2. So that means one comes from mum, one comes from dad, for example, all right? So just remember that point. So what we're focusing on today are traits that are inherited on these chromosomes. And the reason why we need to do it separately is because what we find is that the X chromosome is a lot bigger than the Y chromosome. And because of that fact, the X chromosome contains way more genes, therefore way more traits than the Y chromosome. And so the inheritance pattern is slightly different. And because genetic males are XY and genetic females are XX, the inheritance patterns work differently. We can still use a Punnett square, so that's great. And we still use the terms dominant and recessive inheritance. So you need to understand that. What does that mean? Remember, dominant inheritance means you only need a single copy. So it only needs to sit on one chromosome.
In case you don't understand, right? There is an actual reason why the X is so much bigger than the Y. Okay? And that also has to do with that males are not human. Okay? Because again, the organism that is female, which is the human organism, right? It would already have everything that it needs. Now the males are coming in to hijack the reproduction of the female to make themselves, right? That means that they don't need to bring a lot. Do you understand that? They do not need to bring a lot. This is in any system by which you need to hijack something. Like if you look at the what you might call it, the 9/11 incident of the plane, right? The 9/11 incident, right? The hijackers of the plane, right? They don't have to have pilot training because they can just hold a gun to the pilots, right? They don't have to bring pilots. They wouldn't have to bring their own pilots. They don't have to bring their own planes in order to get that done, right? They just need to bring whatever it is that would accomplish the goal of based on what is already there. And that is why the X is so much bigger. That means that any organism that is going to infect another organism, it doesn't have to have all, it doesn't have it's usually going to be it's usually going to have a lot less genes. Let me repeat that. It's usually going to have a lot less genes than the organism it is invading. And the reason is that it is using the organism it is invading to propagate biological processes that it cannot do. That it cannot do. Do you understand? That is the entire point of parasitism.
Chromosome in order for you to manifest the trait, also known as the phenotype, right? Recessive inheritance means you need 2 copies of that gene in order to manifest that trait or have that phenotype. That means you need to get it on both copies of the chromosomes. That's recessive. So,
okay, so I actually want to get to this
right?
part. Okay, I actually want to get to this part. Let me see if I can get him more out of the way.
Hemophilia.
Oh, yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, so I need you to see this. So he's talking about the sex chromosomes now and how, based on the sex chromosomes, how we inherit, how a female would inherit them and how a male would inherit them, right? So you get 2 from your father. So based on how the genetics work, right? A male would have, per each sperm cell, that it can by. So the sperm comes from one cell, right? And that one cell makes 4 cells. That makes that one sperm, that one sperm cell makes 4 sperms, right? And the same thing with the female. Right? It makes 4 gametes. Yeah. And so this is how, and so as you can see in the 4 squares, right? There are now 8 gametes. And each one, the X or the Y, makes a gamete. Yeah? Okay. Now, here is what is actually important in this very scene. Okay? What do you see? What is the common here? When you say males are human, what is the common factor for every individual on this page? And that would be the X. That would be the X. That means in order for you to take the human form, you need an X. And I've done the test too, right? I've done the test too. In order for you to make a human, you need a Y. Excuse me, you need to have an X, right? And in order for you to even live, you also need an X. That means the X is the human essence. If you cannot live without having a Y, without having an X, you cannot even be human. And without being human, you cannot even, be qualified as one. So the human essence is the X. That is why every human has one. And that is what convinces you that the males are human. Yeah? So now let's look at something else. And that would be the Turner syndrome females. Look at this one.
Hello, in this health sketch we want to talk to you about Turner syndrome. Turner syndrome is a genetic condition that only affects girls. It's named after Dr. Henry Turner, who discovered the syndrome in 1938. On average, for every 2,000 girls born around the world, one of them will have Turner syndrome. Why does Turner syndrome occur? Unlike other genetic conditions, it's not inherited from parents and has nothing to do with a mother's age or environment. Instead, it happens randomly based on how a girl's genes are first formed. Our genes are like a code which determine how we look and how our body works. All of these genes are wrapped up in 46 chromosomes, which are found in every cell of the body. Of these 46 chromosomes, one pair is different between boys and girls, the sex chromosomes X and Y. Boys have an X and Y chromosome, while girls have 2 X chromosomes. In girls with Turner syndrome, the second X chromosome is missing or altered in some way. Because of this, their body develops slightly differently. The syndrome is very variable, and some girls have very few symptoms. So what are the common features of Turner syndrome? Nearly all girls are shorter than average, and their ovaries don't work properly. The ovaries make the hormones estrogen and progesterone. With less of these hormones, girls with Turner syndrome may not have a growth spurt and may not have periods as usual. There are also other more subtle physical differences, for example, having a wide neck or slightly puffy hands and feet. Sometimes these features can be picked up on a pregnancy scan. There are also other more subtle physical differences, for example, having a wide neck or slightly puffy hands and feet. Sometimes these features can be picked up on a pregnancy scan, but Turner syndrome is usually diagnosed after birth. In fact, diagnosis can happen at any age, and because the main features only occur at puberty, some girls aren't diagnosed until they become teens. The test for Turner syndrome involves analyzing the chromosomes from a blood sample called karyotyping. There are also other symptoms that may occur with Turner syndrome. These include weaker bones, hearing difficulties, or problems with the heart, kidneys, or thyroid gland. There may be specific differences with behavior or learning, but overall, intelligence is not affected. This may seem like a long list, but most girls will only have a few features, so treatment will differ from person to person. For the main features of short height and ovary problems, hormone treatments can be used. Estrogen and progesterone can be replaced by taking a tablet or patch. For short height, growth hormone may be given by injection to help a girl grow as tall as she can. Nearly all girls with Turner syndrome will also be infertile, but can still have children through techniques like IVF. So, although there's no cure for Turner syndrome, with treatment, most girls are able to live long, normal, and healthy lives. It is important to get routine checkups by doctors to pick up on any potential problems early on. As Turner syndrome can affect many different parts of the body, a team of specialists may be involved, such as hormone specialists, psychologists, heart specialists, and kidney specialists. In this health sketch, we've talked about the genetic cause of Turner syndrome, the main features of short height and ovary problems, how this can be treated with hormone therapy, and the wider symptoms that can occur. We hope this health sketch has been helpful for you and those around you. Health sketch. Health for all to see. Girls' genes are first formed. Our genes are like a code which determine how we look and how our pair is different between boys and girls. The sex chromosomes.
Okay, so let's pause it right here. So you see an X and a small n here, yeah? Okay. So the reason she has a small n here is because Turner syndrome, like she said, I don't know if you heard this, I did, is that it's Turner syndrome is the level of which your second X is missing. The level to which a second chromosome is missing in you, and usually X. But the reason it only affects females is this, okay? The X is only female. So when there is nothing there, let me repeat this. When there is nothing there, there is not a second Y. When there's no Y there, the X always produces a female. That is why it only affects females. Let me repeat that. Every X only makes females. Every single X chromosome only makes
X
females.
and Y.
That is why this thing only affects females. Now, they will tell you that men are human and men are this and that, etc., right? But if that was so, if they were in fact human, there will be a second version of this X that produces males. But when she said that 1 in 2,000 females, right? That's not actually how many embryos are made on this level. The amount that is made is actually 99% more than we already see, right? So the Turner syndrome females, right? They only 1% of them even come out to be females, even come out at all. Only 1% of them even come out at all, right? And that's because the rest of them die. Because this is so bad. This is such a horrible thing. But the only ones that ever survive are always females. Why? Because that is the level at which you can survive. So if there was, if the males are actually human, then the human gene would produce a second version of them. It would produce a second version that is male. But the human gene, as you can see in the previous video, every human needed a Y. Excuse me, needed an X. I don't know why I keep mixing them up. Every human needed an X. But when you get the X away from the Y, it only produces females. When you get the X away from the Y, it only produces females. There is no version of the X that produces males. There is no version of the human essence that is male. The human essence only produces females. The human essence is only female. The human is only female. Female is only human. Now, the reason why she's saying that, there's a wide range of issues is because there is a level of seriousness of this thing, right? Of this condition, right? To where parts of the X is missing, all the way to the entire X is missing. But what I want to focus on is when the entire X is missing. Yeah? When the entire X is missing, is when it produces only females, right? It doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter which X you get, it's going to only produce females. Because that is the only thing that is human. Right? And some of the symptoms that she described later on, right? One of the symptoms that she described, let me see if I can find, right here, right? Men have these problems. Men have these problems, right? The reason males cannot have children is exactly because of the infertility that she talked about. Let's see. What did she talk about that? Yeah, I just saw it. Yeah, right there.
Nearly all girls with Turner syndrome will also be infertile, but can still.
The reason they are infertile is because you need two X's to reproduce, because that is when you are a complete human. Right? If you remember the mule, the reason the mule is sterile and no one understands it, it's because right, neither genes in the mule is complete. Right? It is a mix of what? Let me look at it. I looked at it recently, but I've forgotten. What is a mule mixed of? Male horse and a male donkey. Yeah. Because the genes are not complete. The reason the mule is sterile is because the genes are not complete. And that is exactly why the males are sterile as well. the reason the males have a workaround why they produce sperm is because they're being of another organism, and that organism, right, already had its own way of replicating itself, right? It evolved a way to override that sterility. It evolved a way to override that sterility. And I made a video about the increasing sterility, excuse me, the increasing fertility, right? That suggests that we are supposed to be parthenogenic. I want to show you that. I want to show you that. Here, right? So these three, from this Turner syndrome to all the way to the X, to the X that we have right now. This is what we have right now. This is what we have right now. Where the X, our X, even though we have two X's, right? Even though we have two X's, we are told that we have two X's. But you didn't know that one of them is inactivated. And what does that mean? The all of your genes, you are using all of your genes to make cells, not to make cells to make more cells, to make more proteins, to make more this, make more glucose, etc. You're using them every single day, right? Which means that you need all your genes at every time, at every moment of time. But this one is available for you to use it for biological processes, but this one is not. And the reason it's not is because there is a thing that is called lionization that inactivates this second X to make it unavailable for you to use for biological processes on a daily basis. So even though you have two X's, you're actually imitating this right here. You are imitating this where you only have one X. This is why you are unable to be parthenogenic. And the Turner syndrome female is completely is infertile because they don't have two X's. And the males, you have to understand that to produce something from your hold on a second. That based on this that I'm saying right now, what I am telling you is that based on this claim that we are supposed that our norm is parthenogenic, what I am also claiming, the subtext of that is what I'm telling you is that the parthenogenic individual is the normal organism for every organism type. That is what I am also claiming. That the parthenogenic reproduction process, reproduction method, that is what is the default for every organism. And that something affected every sexual organism to make us behave not like our default design. That means that this female they are unable to have children because they are missing this, because they're not full organism. Yeah, and that means that the male, right, when they're also missing this, they too cannot have children. And the having of children, again, if this is normal, if this is the default method, if this is the default method for every organism, that means that reproduction means making another you out of you. So that would actually mean that the males are also infertile. So now you have seen, but you also see that the males have a workaround that makes them seem not fertile, that makes them seem fertile, right? So they have this thing that made them pseudo infertile. They have this thing that made them pseudo fertile, right? They have this thing that made them pseudo fertile. Yeah, but now you can see this. Females, right? We can produce from us another one of us, but it doesn't move ahead without help. Yeah, it doesn't move ahead without help. So it looks like we are fertile. It looks like we are fertile, but we are not able to parthenogize, right? So you can see the increasing just by these three alone. Just by these three alone, you can see the increasing fertility there, right? With the degree to which you have an X is the degree to which you what? The degree to which you are fertile. The degree to which you have an X is the degree to which you are fertile. And this X inactivation thing, right? And you can see that between these two individuals here, right? The XO and the XX inactivated. You can see that. And the males are a pseudo cross between these two, right? So when they're saying that in this video, when they're saying that the inactivation would is to normalize the females, right? That means that they are crippling your ability to be normal. So it's not actually normalizing you. If every organism is supposed to be fertile, right? Every organism is supposed to be fertile, and every organism is supposed to be parthenogenic, right? That means that the norm, that means that inactivating your X is actually doing something very, very abnormal. And your biology cannot have a design by which inherent in it is something that is abnormal to you. You understand that? Your biology cannot be such that inherent to it is something that is abnormal to you. That is not how biology works, right? So that means that this inactivation, it is actually a pathology, and it's the enabled sexual behavior is a sickness. It's literally us being sick. The males made us sick by this, by doing this inactivation thing. It is a sickness. And that was revealed by this X-Turner syndrome. It reveals that both are one. The mere fact that you cannot have a male that is Turner syndrome. You cannot have the Turner syndrome only makes females and never the male version. It means only females are human. It also means that this is why when an embryo is developing, right? And I'm actually going to bring that to you very soon as well. An embryo is developing, right? And by the 6 weeks, right? By 6 weeks, and it's developing like normal, exactly like this Turner syndrome female would be, right? The Turner syndrome female, it will start developing exactly like the default, exactly like it's designed, because that is the default. Because that is the default of it. This is how every single one of these would start to develop. Every single one of it. They would all have the same way of developing. So if you all develop the same way, and then but the why is the only time in which there is a different signaling system. The why is the only time there is a different signaling system. That means what is actually happening is that this Y is another organism that is disrupting the signaling system, the normal signaling process of this female, of this female organism, right? Of this female organism, to set a different messaging system, to tell it to develop different, to tell it to develop something not human. That is what is happening. Again, let me repeat that. Because all of these, 1, 2, 3, they would all develop the exact same way, right? They would all start developing the exact same way. And the only time the signaling pathway is different is because it's from this Y. That means that what's actually happening is the Y, the genes of the organism that is the Y, the different organism that is inherent, the different species that is inherent in the Y chromosome genes, okay? It is sending a different signaling pathway, right? To interrupt, to hijack the signal, to hijack the development of the female that is inherent in the X. And the signaling that it is doing by introducing the new signaling pathway is to tell it to not develop a female, but to develop a male instead. That is how it hijacks the female. That is the only way you can get a male. And here's another thing. If you're wondering, well, how do we get a Turner syndrome females, and how do we explain all the other LGBT people, right? Which is the intersex people. Well, in order for, again, because the organism here, it's the process of making an organism, it is happening at a high level, right? Because again, what you're doing is for our entire genome is 40 in the 46 chromosomes, right? It's like 3 billion. Let me repeat that. 3 billion base pairs long, right? And every single one of those have to be copied into the cells as the cells divide, right? That means that and the division itself has to happen rather quickly. It happens rather quickly. So that means that in order for all of that to happen and to happen accurately, right? There has to be control, quality control steps. There have to be quality control steps to make it happen. Because in order for it to be successful, if it's doing so much of the things that it's doing, if it continues, if it's not accurate, if it's not 100% accurate, right? It will accumulate errors and errors and errors and errors and errors and errors and errors. So it has to be 100% accurate all the time, right? So that means it would have to, but you also know that the from basic biology that you've taken in high school, in middle school, etc., that the mere process of copying something, right? Of copying something, anything, right? It inherent in that process is mistakes. And so there are quality control steps to ensure that these things are corrected. And the correction makes it so that 100% of the time it is done correctly, right? And one of the quality control, but that is not just on the copying level, right? That is not just on the copying level. That is on the cellular level, on the molecular level, on the organismal level, right? On every level, it has to be perfect on every level, right? But one of the quality control steps that has to happen is that the it has to check for 2xx. It has to check for three things actually. It has to check for three things. It has to make sure that it has XX, which means it has to what? It has to check that it doesn't have a single Y. It has to check that it doesn't have more than two X's. Excuse me, it has to check to make sure that it doesn't have one X, right? It doesn't have no X, and it doesn't have, actually no, because if it doesn't have no, if it has no X, it will simply die. So it doesn't have to check for that actually. It will simply die. It doesn't have to check for that. So it has to make sure that it has it doesn't have it has to make sure that the developing organism that's about to go through the embryogenesis process, right? It doesn't have one X. It has to check for an X, right? This is just one of the many things that it has to check for. It has to check for whether it has one X or not. It has to check for whether it has two X's or not. And it has to check for whether it has three X's or not, right? And the XX, the 2X check, the 2X check, right? That is the positive check to make sure that it has two X's, right? And sometimes during that check, it would realize that there aren't actually two X's, right? So it would see that then it would have to check to see if there is an X, a singular X, or more than X, or more than two X's, right? And that process is what they have to append. It is that quality control system is what they have to append to allow this to happen. And it's right. So again, that process checks for three things: 1X, 2X's, or more than three, or more than two. 1X, 2X's, or more than two X's. And that is the quality control system that has to be appended, right? So you have to allow the two X's to go in, but you would not allow an 1X to go through. And you also would not allow anything that has more than two X's to go through, right? So if you flip that on the other side, right, then you would allow 1X to go. You would not allow two X's to go, and you would also allow more than two X's to go. You understand that? Because you're flipping on its head now. So now it's doing the opposite of what is actually the quality control. What is actually the default quality control. So now you're allowing the XX to go in, which will be this Y, this one right here, right? And you're also allowing the triple X's, anything that is more than two X's to go in, right? So that means that you would actually block the making of a female. You will block the making of a female. Yes, you would, until the males realized that you cannot make a female, that they cannot reproduce. They cannot reproduce, which means that if you block the making of a female, right, the species ends. The species would end because the males are sterile. Because the males are pseudo-sterile, right? So they had to do this thing. They had to do another fix to do this. Whereas what? Whereas you check for you check for a paternal X. You check for a paternal. So this is another process that is in this grand scheme of stopping this parthenogenic individual from happening, right? So this is another process entirely. But the XO individual is part of what revealed this, yeah? And that's why they are important. So there is going to be another system that is going to say, okay, so the males are going to tag the X that they got here. They're going to tag it as a paternal sourced X, right? So once they edit this new quality control system to make sure that you do not create a female, to now allow it to create a female. So now they will have to institute another quality control to say that you would need an X from a father. You would need an X from a father, which would be a paternal source X. And that would have the paternal tag on it. So when these two X's constitute together, when these two constitute together, two XX, right? They would just start doing what XX do when they get together, which is to start generating an individual, right? But then later down the line, right, something will go wrong. Something will go wrong unless you have a paternal source X, right? Unless you have a paternal source X. So now, unless you have a paternal source X, you cannot make one of these. Unless your process has an X that is tagged paternal, you cannot make one of these, right? Okay, so then let's say you do have a paternal source X. Then this happens. This X inactivation happens. It happens so that it reduces this X from being this, right? Because once it makes this, once you allow it to make this, it will no longer need the male. It will go ahead and make the male. It will go ahead and try to make the female every time, and the male, even if it cannot, because no. If you allow it to go ahead, right, without this, it would try to make the female every single time. Again, because it is a default. It just happens by default. Again, because it is a default, it just happens on its own. Because it is a default, it just happens on its own. But here's what would happen. Because you block it from having a paternal X, because you block it from going ahead to get for going ahead without a paternal X, right? It means you could never have any female. You still cannot have any female unless you deactivate this, unless you inactivate one of them. So let me repeat that. So you allow it to after having a paternal X, yeah? After having a paternal X, it goes ahead because that is the automatic way it just happens. Once there are two X's, right? And the organism is varied and all the steps are there, right? It just goes ahead because it is an automatic process. Yeah? So it will try to make a female, right? But you have the block on it to say that unless it has a paternal X, right? Unless it has a paternal X, it cannot make a female, right? So that means you cannot make a female at all. Because when this happens, right? When this has a paternal X, yeah? When this has a paternal X, right? In the next individual, right? In the progeny that this one would make, because this individual would become an adult. This individual would become an adult, right? And then it would want to again make a child, because it is on automatic. So this individual would become an adult, right? So that means that it would need to so when it has the two X's, once it has the two X's, the reproduction again is automatic because it is parthenogenic. It is automatic. So then it will go ahead with the paternal thing, right? It would go ahead. It would go ahead without the paternal thing. Because why? Because you have to do this every organism with every embryo. Every single female has to get this because again, it is not natural to them, right? It is not natural to them. Okay, so you have to do all the steps, every single one of them. So the next individual that this one would create would then be able to be fully activated parthenogenic individual. And now you have what? You are right back to square one very quickly. And you have to understand how quickly this is, right? How quickly this would happen, because it happens automatically. Once this individual reaches what you call it, adulthood, right? Sexual adulthood, maturity, right? This happens automatically, right? So that means that you have lost immediately, whatever thing that you did with the paternal imprinting, right? So that is why they needed to inactivate this in every one. So this is what would happen to the embryo of this guy. So this is what would happen to the embryo of this woman. So they inactivate this. I'll be right back. They inactivate it so that she cannot be parthenogenic, right? So you now have a self-fulfilling a cycle where the adult form, like this, when this one becomes adult, because she's now inactivated, right? Because she's not inactivated, she cannot make another one of these, right? So when she goes to make a female, this process happens again to that female, right? So when this process happens to that female, grows up and cannot again do this, right? So she would. Okay, so when when they do it to this one, to this embryo, right? This is what happens to the embryo at the embryo stage, to the female that has been created at the embryo stage. She cannot be parthenogenic, yeah? So when she goes to make a female, it will check to make sure that she has the paternal X again, right? And if she doesn't, and so this is when this female becomes an adult, right? So now she's creating another female at the embryo stage. So that female, in order for her to make that female, she would need an X from a male, right? But that is not, but the X though, the X that she gets from that male, it doesn't guarantee that she would not create this individual. So they have to redo this step to that embryo. So now the mother now has the X inactivated, and then that has to be done again to the embryo. So that now both females, the mother and the child, are inactivated. Yeah. So that will be one of the things that we're talking about next. This cycle of how they're controlling this parthenogenesis. And you have to understand that the reason you need to do it to every female is because this is an automatic thing. Once the X's are together, they just go, right? Because they are the default. Because they are the default. Yeah. It is like when you don't have lung issues, you just breathe. No one has to tell you to breathe. No one has to tell you look left and breathe, right? It just goes. When you don't have heart issues, your heart just beats. That's exactly how this is. When the two X's get together, they just go. And their process of making another individual, right, would exclude the need for another, would exclude the need for a male every time these two are together like this. That is why you have to inactivate every single embryo of a female, every single female embryo. But what that also tells us is that, did you get it? Right? What that also tells us is that it is, God, I'm constantly, forgetting this word now, not inheritable. What is that word? What word? What word means? Oh my goodness, why am I always forgetting this word now? There was a time that I always remember it. Something that is not heritable, right? What is that word? Okay. And I actually looked it up before. Let me look it up on Google. Okay. What is the word for something not genetically heritable? I have to look up this. I'm so annoyed. Non-hereditary. Yes. It is non-hereditary. Oh my God. Oh my goodness. Let me tell you something. Before I realized that parthenogenesis was our default, okay? Before I realized that parthenogenesis was our default, I did not know this. I only realized this a few days ago. When I was telling you that parthenogenesis is our default, I did not know that what they did was not hereditary. I did not know that this X inactivation was non-hereditary. I did not know this. The fact that it has to be done to every individual means that you can, in fact, undo it. We can undo it. Oh, and on top of that, I made another video that said that the X inactivation has to be maintained throughout life, which is another clue that we can undo it. That it is telling you that the X inactivation is so badly not normal that it has to be maintained. That it is so badly not the norm that it has to be maintained throughout life. And that if you let up from maintaining it, it goes back to its original. Oh my goodness, you know what that means. Before, I was worried that if we were in fact going to reverse this thing, how would we make it happen in every individual? And now I just got a clue that that is even possible. And I don't even know, I still don't know how the science is going to play out. But right now, I know for sure, 100% that is possible. When I was telling you that we could fix it, right? That was based on the prior evidence that I had just seen. That was a conclusion based on a lot of other evidence. That means that was a theory at the time. A theory based on other evidence. A theory that I had tested through other evidence, but I didn't have direct evidence of it. And now I have direct evidence. The reason it is done for every individual is because it is so far from normal. It is not your default. That means they basically have to cripple every female. This is a system to cripple every female. This is a system to cripple every female. This XO individual is one of the clues. That is why they are important. That is why they are important. This is one of the clues. Because how come when you tell us that the male is human, how come the X doesn't have a male version? How come the X doesn't have a male version? How come each one of these in every stage is female? How come each one of these in every stage is female first and foremost? This has gone on too long, so I am going to end it here. 55 minutes, Jesus Christ. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I guess I get so focused on these things, I forget to shorten the time. Thank you very much. Please, I would love for you to get into the comments and tell me and ask questions about things that you don't understand, because I know this is very convoluted stuff. This is very, very convoluted. Yeah. Till next time, ladies. Bye-bye.